Hello everybody and welcome to the Animation Podcast, a weekly podcast about all things animation brought to you by FilmBook. My name is Matt Brunet, but some of you may know me as AniMat from my YouTube channel, Electric Dragon 505, home of web series that are all about animation, including Animation Look Back and AniMat's Reviews. Now, if this is your first time here in the Animation Podcast, well, let me tell you, you just came in at a pretty interesting time because I got some fascinating stories to get into. And for example, for this episode, I am actually going to be talking about a heavily requested story for me to discuss regarding Saudi Arabia and how they're officially lifting off its 35-year cinema ban. Then afterwards, we will be looking into Toy Story 4 and how they got a brand new writer. Then afterwards, we will be looking into Superman and what would happen if he's a communist. Then afterwards, we will be talking about the Marvel stuff and how they might be going into a big shift in their animation front. And then finally, we will end things off with AniMat's Pick of the Week. If you want to check out more episodes of the Animation Podcast, then head on down to FilmBook, which is film-book.com, by searching the Animation Podcast. You can also email us at podcast@filmbook.com with the Animation Podcast in the subject line. And I just want to start things off before I go ahead and get things started that I do hope that everybody is okay this week and hopefully you guys are surviving the flu season because I'm going to be very honest, this week it was a bit of a nightmare for me. I got a massive cold and I'm trying to recover from it ever since, so I do apologize if I do sound a little bit different or if there's something about me that seems off in this episode. I'm just trying to recover from a hell of a cold, and I do hope that you guys are okay during that time, so I just want to look out for you. But anyways, let's go ahead and talk about our first story right over here, which in this one, it's actually pretty interesting because there's one little part of it that made it so heavily requested. Like throughout the week when I was sick, I have received messages after messages on social media where people wanted me to discuss about this story because of one significant little thing. So before I get into the actual juicy part that people want to know, and why is it I'm even talking about this in the Animation Podcast, let me just give you guys a little bit of a history in Saudi Arabia. Now, let me just start things off back in the 1970s. And during that time, Saudi Arabia was pretty much enjoying their time with movies. Cinema was actually kind of a big thing at the time, but it was also considered a pretty controversial thing, considering that some people would actually consider the movies and cinema a little bit un-Islamic, considering that it is trying to influence Western cultures onto the country. And there are plenty of Islamic conservatives. They really do not like the idea of cinemas and movie theaters because it's an area in which men and women can mix and mingle. And for them, it's a little bit of a no-no. And so what happened was that back in the beginning of the 1980s, there was a massive Islamic revival movement in which they really want to enforce the Islamic religion onto the country, like make it a big deal once again, and really have people go by the book, or in this case, go by the Quran. And thus, they decided to go and put in a massive ban in all cinemas and in all theaters. So for about 35 years now, Saudi Arabia went on without having any sort of movies. There are a few movies that came out of Saudi Arabia as time would move on, but there was never any that they would actually go and experience. They can't go see any of the big Hollywood movies, or they can't really go and see any of the local movies that they have done. However, everything has pretty much changed at the end of 2017, when the Saudi Arabian Minister of Culture and Information, the man is named Awad bin Saleh Al-Awad, decided to announce to make a brand new project and to really change everything when it comes to presenting movies in Saudi Arabia, where they decided now it's officially going to be okay for them to go see movies. And they decided to develop an entire idea, like the entire Saudi Arabian government decided to go with this big plan, which is called Vision 2030, where by 2030, they would go and open a grand total of more than 300 cinemas that would hold a total of more than 2,000 screens, in which they could go ahead and check out all the big movies, both from international, the big Hollywood movies, and also local features as well. So they decided to go ahead and make that big plan, which was all organized and spearheaded by the country's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud. And you might be wondering, with all that said, why is it a big requested story? Why is it that people seem to really want me to talk about this if this is just about Saudi Arabia having a brand new movement where now they're allowed to go see movies after 35 years? Well, let me just tell you, and also to add in a little bit of that information, that it's not going to be when 2030 comes and then suddenly all the 300 theaters would appear. This is going to happen bit by bit, and the first ever permanent cinema that will be built by this plan is actually going to be opening during this spring. However, it was on January 13th when they decided to go and give Saudi Arabian people a little taste of cinema, to go out and actually see the movies and to have that experience for the first time ever in a temporary movie theater, just to, you know, like I said, to give audiences a taste. So, why is it that I'm talking about this in the animation podcast? Well, let me go ahead and read this to you, just a little excerpt from my source here in the Animation magazine. On January 13th, Sony Pictures Animation's The Emoji Movie became the first film to receive a public showing in the country as part of a double feature with DreamWorks Animation's Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. So yes, people, after 35 years without watching any sort of movie in that country, the first one they decided to go is one of the worst animated features ever created and possibly the most hated animated film ever. The first one out of all this is the Emoji Movie. You know what? Actually, I think I do have a little bit of a theory as to why they decided the first would be the Emoji Movie. Because you know what? I think the government is still against people watching movies. You know, they still want to have the Islamic movement continue on so that nobody is allowed to go see movies. But this time, they want to make sure to go with a little bit of a new plan. Oh, sorry about that. I told you, I'm trying to get through a cough. Anyways, as I was saying, what the government is trying to do now is that they want to make sure that nobody would be willing to go see a movie, not by force, but by choice. That they would give them a taste to go and check out the Emoji Movie, and then they would be so disgusted by it that they would never want to see a single movie ever again. You know, that's a very clever plan. I see where you're going, Saudi Arabia. You're pretty clever on that. Okay, no, but seriously though, personally, when I read about this and when I read about the cinema ban that Saudi Arabia had, and now they want to open up to go and have Saudi Arabians actually go see movies, personally, I actually do find this to be a very beautiful thing. And not the fact that Saudi Arabians are watching the Emoji Movie. That's almost inhumane, you know? That's almost like Taliban movement level of, like, terrible. But what I mean by here is that it's actually really beautiful, the fact that that Saudi Arabians, after all these years, that they were restricted from watching any movies or experience a feature film because of strict religious movements, that now they can actually go ahead and check this again. And honestly, that's quite fantastic, because in a way, the language of cinema is kind of its own thing. I mean, yeah, sure. Like, you would have characters talking in a variety of languages, and like technically you would have a movie that would speak English, that would speak French, but the language of cinema is its own language. And it is really beautiful that now Saudi Arabians are actually experiencing this, not just from their own country, because, like I said before, they are starting to get their own feature films, and pretty soon, in North America, we are actually going to get a little taste of Saudi Arabia, since they are actually going to release here soon, which is actually the first ever animated feature that's fully financed in Saudi Arabia, which is called Bilal, A New Breed of Hero. And in here, it's actually fantastic that now they can actually get a taste of what movies are like, not just from their own country, but from all around the world, so that they can learn movies, that they can experience movies, that they can understand movies and learn from the stories that they would want to tell. Now, of course, this would get some controversy again from the country, considering that it is kind of adapting Western cultures onto the country, and it might go a little bit against some of the things that would be said in the Islamic religion and all that kind of stuff. But then again, at least Saudi Arabians, through movies, they can learn, they can understand each other, and they can experience new things. And on top of that, they could go ahead and travel onto new worlds, into places that they have never seen before and probably could never see outside of their own country. And I don't mean like real places like New York or London or Paris and stuff like that, but even like fantasy worlds, like going to Middle Earth or going to Pandora or going into anywhere. Like just go beyond their imagination. And that's where I find the true beauty. And honestly, just looking at this, I do hope that in the future, probably by 2030, when they do have all their movie theaters, I would actually be so happy to see that there would be the day that Saudi Arabians would look back and would actually find the Emoji Movie to be a bad film, and they would hate it too. Now, don't get me wrong, allow me to explain a little bit by what I mean by that. That I want to see the day that Saudi Arabians, that they would go and watch more and more movies, down to the point that they would go and not only create brand new jobs, but like since that's what the Minister of Culture and Information actually said. Let me just read a little quote that he did say from my source in the Animation magazine, that opening cinemas will act as a catalyst for economic growth and diversification. By developing a broader cultural sector, we will create new employment and training opportunities, as well as enriching the kingdom's entertainment options. So not only is it going to create new jobs, but it's going to create a lot more film lovers. We're going to see more film critics. We're going to see more film admirers, people who love to go and watch the movies. That can actually be a thing in Saudi Arabia, that not only would they go and experience a lot of good movies, but they could also experience a lot of bad movies where they can learn what to do and also what not to do, and maybe inspire them to go ahead and tell their own stories, to go and maybe make their own films, or be inspired to go and create their own worlds. And then, when 2030 comes, and they would experience all the different movies that they have seen, they can actually look back into the first film that they have seen after the 35-year ban, and they look back and they would say, hey, you know that movie that had all those talking yellow dots and stuff like that? And like it has some poop in it. Yeah, you know, that was a really stupid film. You know, that honestly, after watching all the movies that I've seen now, you know, looking back at it, that really did suck. I mean, do Americans really consider that entertainment? My God, Americans really are stupid. What are they thinking in the West? I'm telling you, they could think like that. Oh, and also, just one more quick thing. The whole message that I'm trying to say from there is not that I want to see more people hate the Emoji Movie. I want to see Saudi Arabians actually go and develop a love for movies. That's what I'm trying to say. I just want to make that quick message right over there, and I just want to make that clarification just because it's really easy on the internet when you got a whole bunch of haters who can't handle an opinion outside of their own. They would just take your words, try to twist it in a way just to make you look bad because they're angry because you don't like a movie that they like or some bullcrap like that, you know? Just trying to play safe right there. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole story with Saudi Arabia. And honestly, I really do wish them the best of luck with the whole Vision 2030 mission. And I really do hope that Saudi Arabians will get to experience a lot more great movies to come. Now, our next story that we have right over here, we're going to be talking about one of the upcoming big animated features that's going to be coming out next year, which is Toy Story 4. Now, as you probably have heard in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, you may have noticed there have been a lot of switches. Like, originally, it was supposed to be John Lasseter making a comeback to direct this movie, but then it got replaced by someone else. Actually, I should have done a little bit of my research on that. Just want to see, who is directing Toy Story 4 now? Is it Josh Cooley? Yes, okay, yeah. Like, it was supposed to be John Lasseter, but now it's being directed by Josh Cooley. And then there's also a switch up with the writers, and yeah, all that kind of stuff. Like, it was supposed to be released this year, but then Pixar decided that they're just going to delay it onto 2019. Now, the big thing that actually did happen this week is that now they actually did hire a brand new writer. And this actually goes by the name of Stephany Folsom, whom she has been hired by Disney and Pixar in order to go and be the screenwriter of Toy Story 4. Now, the job was originally handled by Rashida Jones and Will McCormack, but then in November, they decided to quit, mainly because this was during the middle of the huge controversy with John Lasseter, who had to take a 6-month sabbatical because he was causing some sexual misconducts all around Pixar. And there were talks that maybe that was the reason why Rashida Jones decided to quit, but that was not the case. In fact, let me just read a little bit from my source here from Variety. It states, Folsom is filling the slot left vacant by Rashida Jones and writing partner Will McCormack in November. Jones denied a published report that she had left over an unwanted advance from Pixar and director animation chief John Lasseter, and said instead they left over philosophical differences, as asserted that their exit was over the fact that they believed that women and people of color did not have an equal creative voice at Pixar. Wait. It actually did state that John Cooley is being the new director here. I don't know why I did that whole thing. Okay, but anyways, for those of you who are wondering who is Stephany Folsom, she is actually more of a new writer. She doesn't have any major big credentials, like she's not attached to any big movies that she had written in the past, but she actually is a very promising writer, where she actually did have a script that ended up in the blacklist, which is called 1969, A Space Odyssey, or How Kubrick Learned to Stop Worrying and Land on the Moon. And yeah, that is pretty much a mouthful of a title, but what that script is that it basically tells a fictionalized story where Stanley Kubrick was convinced by a publicist to actually go work at NASA and try to film a fake version of the moon landing. Like, this is pretty much set in a world where apparently the moon landing is actually fake and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much the big story that we got right over here, is the fact that Pixar finally found a new writer for Toy Story 4. And honestly, looking into the schedule, looking into how the production is going, and seeing all the different people that are being switched and stuff like that, honestly, it's giving me a bit of a bad feeling of Toy Story 4. Because I've seen stuff like this happen at Pixar, and usually the results don't necessarily go well. Now, I'm not saying that this is pretty much the same thing like what happened with Brave or The Good Dinosaur, but you could tell that the production is not going as smoothly as many of their other features, and this could actually hinder onto the quality of Toy Story 4. And what's even worse is that Toy Story 4 already has a bit of a bad reputation as it is. Because the thing is, when you look back at the previous trilogy with Toy Story 2, and Toy Story 3, I think it's pretty much safe to say that it is the most beloved and possibly the greatest animated trilogy of all time, especially with Toy Story 3, how it ended off such on a legendary note, like a note so big that it became the first ever animated feature to cross $1 billion at the box office, and it pretty much ended off in a phenomenal conclusion where we are happy seeing Andy and his toys go in their own separate ways. So making a Toy Story 4, it doesn't necessarily make sense to people. And the fact that we are seeing sorry about that. And the fact that we are seeing different people switch up in the production, like we do see John Lasseter being switched by Josh Cooley, and then we see Rashida Jones and Will McCormack being switched by Stephany Folsom. It doesn't give a good image to Toy Story 4 that it might not turn out to be as clean as many of the other popular Pixar films. Now, I do understand that maybe the reason why we have all these big switches is not necessarily because of Toy Story 4 itself, and that the production is not going as smoothly as Pixar would hope for. Like, that's why I'm saying that it's not like Brave or The Good Dinosaur, because in there, the big reason why there are some switch-ups with the directors and stuff like that, it was mainly because the production, it wasn't going as well as much as the executive producers wish it would, so they decided that hopefully to save the project, they'll go and get a new director. But in this case right over here, there are some different things that are happening behind the scenes, especially with the controversy of John Lasseter. And the reason why Rashida Jones and Will McCormack had to leave, it's not really because of Toy Story 4, but it's mostly because of the work ethics inside Pixar. But still, it does give a bit of a worrying image that Toy Story 4, I'm not going to say it might turn out to be a bad film, but it could turn out to be the weakest Toy Story film, and maybe the quality of it might go as high as either Brave or The Good Dinosaur. And the thing with Pixar is that if one of their movies that got released, if it's not like legendary, like a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 movie, then it gets slammed hard. Like, there are still people to this day that would heavily bash Brave or The Good Dinosaur, despite getting some good reviews. Not great, but good reviews. So, for me, I am starting to feel a little bit more cautious with more news that are coming out with Toy Story 4. And especially the fact that some of the actors are not going to be reprising their roles because, well, they're dead. Like, we've already had Slinky Dog that passed away before Toy Story 3. And then also, a lot of people are going to be anticipating to who is going to replace Don Rickles as Mr. Potato Head. We'll just have to wait and see with how it goes. But if you guys are still excited to go and check out how Toy Story 4 is going to be, then all you have to do is just wait until June 21st, 2019. Now for our next story, I want you to look up in the sky, to look high above the horizon. You will see that something is flying up there, a mysterious object. What could that possibly be? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No! It is something even better than any of that! It is communism! Steigerster verschwinde die Straße Seidossen, Okay, I had my fun right there. No, what I'm talking about is actually Superman, a communist Superman, because we could actually be getting an animated film based on Superman Red Son. Now, the story goes is that apparently at the premiere screening of Batman Gotham by Gaslight, Bruce Timm, who is the executive producer of many of the animated films and TV shows that are based on the DC comics, and probably his biggest achievement, of course, is with Batman the Animated Series, he actually discussed that he could be interested for his next animated feature could actually be based on Superman Red Son. Now, for those of you who don't know what Superman Red Son is, it's actually a 3-issue comic back in 2003 that is actually written by legendary comic book writer Mark Millar, who is known to be the writer of Kick-Ass and Old Man Logan. Now, the thing with Red Son is that this is actually a comic that is part of the Elseworld series. And for those of you who don't know what Elseworld is, it's basically a series in DC where they would take their popular characters and they would put them in a different situation. Like with Gotham by Gaslight, for example, that pretty much answers the question to what happens if you would take Batman and you would put him in the Victorian era. Now, in the case of Superman Red Son, that one answers the question, what happens if you take Superman and instead of being discovered in Kansas, in Smallville, Kansas, he would actually go and be discovered in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In fact, let me just read you a little bit of a synopsis of what it is. Going into my source here by Geek Tyrant, it stated, Superman Red Son is a vivid tale of Cold War paranoia that reveals how the ship carrying the infant, who would later be known as Superman, lands in the midst of 1950s Soviet Union. Raised on a collective, the infant grows to become a symbol of the Soviet people, and the world changes drastically from what we know, bringing Superman into conflict with Batman, Lex Luthor, and many more. And they would even mention, also just reading a little bit more, some of the other things that we've seen in the story includes the Soviet Union taking over the Amazons and Wonder Woman being forced to serve them. Batman ends up being a guerrilla freedom fighter. Then there's Brainiac and Green Lantern, who also makes an appearance. So that's basically the whole thing. It answers the question, what happens if you take Superman and you make him Russian, if you make him a communist, basically, going against the Americans and all that kind of stuff. So that's the big tale that's going on with Superman. But is it actually going to happen? Are we actually going to be seeing this animated film? Well, honestly, the answer for now is maybe, but we'll have to wait and see. During the Q&A that Bruce Timm was in, he stated that he's only interested, and for now, he just wants to make sure to check out what's going to be happening with Batman Gotham by Gaslight. If that actually goes well, if audiences love the movie, and it actually sells well with all the DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that, then he would consider to go and make Superman Red Son. Because Gotham by Gaslight is kind of like testing the waters to see if audiences are interested to see an animated feature based on the Elseworld comics. And honestly, it does sound pretty interesting. And if they do bring in more of these, bring in more of these comics that are based, like more of these Elseworld comics and turn them into animated features, I think it would bring in a lot of material, and we would see whole new different versions of Batman, Superman, and all these characters. I think it would actually be a pretty cool idea, and it would introduce audiences to all the different stories. And like seeing this Red Son, it would actually interest me to go and check out like the comics themselves, see like what all the big fuss is actually about. But then again, what's interesting about this one is that this is actually pretty anticipated, since Red Son is actually a highly acclaimed comic series. And with that one, that's where I'm starting to become a little bit cautious. And that's just me talking after my experience with The Killing Joke. If you guys remember back in 2016, that was one of the most anticipated animated features where they decided to go and adapt Batman The Killing Joke, one of the most beloved Batman comics into an animated feature. And it kind of turned out to be pretty mixed. I mean, yeah, sure, we did get a legit comic adaptation of The Killing Joke, but my god, I don't know if I would, I'm debating if I could say it's a bad movie, but man, did it come out as a disappointment. And the first 30 minutes, my god, it was stupid. I mean, yeah, like some people could argue, it was just sex for God's sakes, but it was dumb. It was absolutely, it's nothing but a disappointment, I would have to say. So I am honestly being a little bit cautious with this one. But yeah, overall, I do like the idea of making more Elseworld comics and turn them into animated features, but we'll just have to wait and see with how the execution could be. So I guess the first thing we'll have to do is just go and check out Gotham by Gaslight. If that can work, then most likely they can make Superman Red Sun work. Now, our next story that we have right over here, I'm just going to warn you right now that so far, these are just rumors. There is nothing that is really confirmed, but this is just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up of what could possibly happen in the future. But if this is actually true, then I'm just going to say that if you guys are enjoying your time on Disney XD watching some of those Marvel shows, please don't get used to it because they might not even last long. Apparently, it has been stated that there's a rumor going along that according to the Tomb of the Cartoon Monkey Skeleton, they have stated that all the projects that are involved with the Marvel animated series, and these would include Avengers Assemble, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Marvel Spider-Man, they might actually go down pretty soon. And the reason why they're saying that they could shut down is actually to go into a shift where Marvel wants to take its animation route and they want to go and do animated features to actually be more of a competitor with DC into the market of direct-to-DVD animated features. And not too long ago, they actually did announce that there is going to be an all-new Marvel animated film coming soon called Marvel Rising, which will actually star some of the Supergirls of the Marvel universe. Some of these would actually include Squirrel Girl, Spider-Gwen, and Quake, and so much more, of course. But for now, there is a possibility that they could be closing down the animated shows. And for now, what's going to happen is that, sadly, yes, the artists and animators who are working on those TV shows, they are going to be laid off. For now, they're just finishing off their job with what they're doing with the current season, and then they're just gonna go. And, you know, like, this actually does remind me, like, after talking about Superman Red Sun and now this, it is actually very interesting when you look into the relationship between Marvel and DC, because there are two different ways of how this could be interpreted, especially when it comes to the movies. And when you do look into the live action films, then of course, we all know that Marvel is pretty much king. I mean, Marvel is legit changing the face of cinema as we know it with the Marvel Cinematic Universe releasing hit after hit. Not only do they all connect well telling this one giant story, but they all work well as their own individual feature films. Like, you don't have to follow the big narrative of the Marvel Cinematic Universe to enjoy them. You could just take them individually, like just watch Spider-Man Homecoming and watch Guardians of the Galaxy and watch the Thor movies, and you can have fun just looking at those right over there. And then when you look at DC with their extended universe, yeah, they're honestly really dragging. Like, they really are lagging in that department. I mean, yeah, sure, they got Wonder Woman, and that was a massive hit right over there. But then you look at the other films, like you got Batman vs. Superman, they got Suicide Squad, and Justice League. Yeah, they really are starting off on the wrong foot, and they are looking pretty bad at this point. I'm honestly kind of surprised that Warner Brothers is still devoted to keep moving forward with the cinematic universe, and they're not putting the fate of it in the same veins of the Dark Universe in a way. So yeah, that's kind of the big thing. With the live action films, Marvel is king, and DC is having a hard time to really continue on with them. But then, when you look into the animation front, that's when things start to really flip 180. Now, it's kind of interesting because when you look into the animation front of DC, they really do have a strong fan base. And DC actually does have a pretty big reputation of releasing animated features based on some of their most beloved comics. And I'm talking about stuff like Batman Year One, or The Dark Knight Returns, or even some of their upcoming ones like Superman Red Sun that I was talking about, or Batman Gotham by Gaslight. Like, they really do have a big, strong following that people appreciate, that people love to see. And with Marvel, on the other hand, well, let's be honest, they don't really have much memorable stuff. I mean, yeah, maybe they do have, like, a couple of Spider-Man shows that are worth remembering, but other than that, I mean, really, can anybody name me any, like, amazing animated Marvel movies that they got there? No, Big Hero 6 doesn't count. Like, honestly, they really are lagging in that department. And I mean, even with the TV shows, like I said, sure, they got some Spider-Man series, but when you look at DC, again, they got some big shows, like especially with Batman the Animated Series. Not only do some people consider it one of the best animated TV shows out there, but also some people would even say that Batman the Animated Series is one of the best adaptations of Batman, period. Like, even more so than many of the movies and many of the comics even, which is actually a pretty big deal right over there. But yeah, I do understand that if the rumors are actually true right now, then I do see what Marvel is trying to do. They want to have a bit of a step up a step up from DC. And in a way, I could see this work because in a way, there are three different directions that they could actually go. Like, if they want to go and commit to making more animated features, they could either A, make a lot more movies based on their big name comics. B, they can go and they can go ahead and tell a completely original story. Or C, and this is something that could actually work very well, they could actually make direct-to-DVD animated features that would connect little bits of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, if there are some questions that need to be answered, then they can actually go ahead and actually go and just make a little story out of it. You know, just find ways in order to connect like Spider-Man Homecoming with Iron Man. Or what about the stuff that happened in between some of the movies? Like, what happened in between Doctor Strange and Infinity Wars? Or what about the Incredible Hulk? How is it that he ended up in his position in Thor Ragnarok? Or what about, like, some of the spin-offs, like, starring different characters? Like, you can have an animated feature that would star Rocket Raccoon, or you can have an animated feature starring Black Hawk. You can do something like that, and there is some strong, some very strong potential that you could actually go with it and make Marvel an actual competitor with DC, to DC in the animation front. So, in a way, I do understand where they're going with it, but for now, these are just considered rumors, and we're not 100% sure if these TV shows are actually going away. If we actually are seeing the end of stuff like Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy and Spider-Man. But I will say for now, if you guys are still interested in checking those shows out, season 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be coming out at the end of February on February 27th. And you also got Spider-Man, which is actually going to be coming back on, I believe, Sunday, January 21st, both on Disney XD. But are we actually going to see this happen? Who knows? And so, finally, we will now go and end things off with AniMat's Pick of the Week. And for this week, I'm going to be honest, there really hasn't been a lot of big animation news that has been going on, so I decided I might as well go ahead and actually discuss a little story that I've wanted to do for a little while now, and I wanted to go and do a bit more research into it to fully understand what this is all about. And what I'm talking, of course, is actually going to be regarding a popular meme in which, as I am doing this right now, as I'm recording this, that it's actually pretty big and pretty popular. And by the way, don't worry guys, no. I'm not talking about the Ugandan knuckles. That thing, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people by now that are pretty annoyed by it and are just waiting for it to be over. Don't worry, I completely understand. I'll take the queen and I could show her the way myself. But honestly, yeah, I do agree. That meme has got to go. Just let Gregzilla have his Knuckles back, and we could just go back to the good old days when that Knuckles is just known to be a cute, chubby little singer. But no, what I'm actually talking about is actually a meme that is based on an old cartoon in which you might actually be familiar with this. This is actually a meme in which you would go and see this old cartoon, and just imagine this, where you see the three bears, like from Goldilocks and the Three Bears, they would come back and they would notice that in their bowl, something is not right. And the Papa Bear, who is wearing a green sweater or just a green buttoned up shirt, he would look at it and he would say the famous line, "Somebody touch my spaghetti!" And that's what I am talking about. I am going to be analyzing and finding out the origins of "Somebody touch my spaghetti." So, what we're going to do right over here, I'm basically going to show you the origins of "Somebody touching my spaghetti." Where did this come from? Who made it? And we're pretty much answering the big questions that we all want to know. Who is the individual that did dare to go and touch this bear's spaghetti? So let's go ahead and figure all this out, shall we? So, where this all came from is actually based on a 1939 cartoon known as The Three Bears. And let me just tell you guys a little bit of what this cartoon is all about. Now, of course, as you can imagine, this is a loose adaptation of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. In fact, it's a little bit more of a parody in a way. And for some reason, they didn't really disclose to why. They decided to make the family a little bit of an Italian stereotype. And again, I'm not sure. They just wanted to do it because I guess they want to try to stand out or something like that. But yeah, as you can imagine, instead of having porridge, of course, they would have spaghetti. And instead of really just being bears and stuff like that, you also got a bit of a subplot where the baby bear is, like the Papa Bear wants the baby bear to learn how to play violin. And the Papa Bear is just not happy with the baby bear because he doesn't want to, how can I put this? Well, as he said it best, practice the fiddle. So what ends up happening is that they would go and walk out, and then of course you see Goldilocks. And the thing with Goldilocks is that they decided to present her as a more modern Goldilocks. Now, I'm not saying that this is Goldilocks where she's modern like modern nowadays, where she would just be dabbing her way onto the Three Bears house. What I'm saying is that she's more modern in 1939. Like, she's trying to relate with the audience back then. And during that time, she's pretty much really big into the jitterbug. And you would see Goldilocks constantly singing her way through, like, I'm Goldilocks, and I like to jigger, shake it around, turn around, champion, and all that kind of stuff. But then, like, you got that little narrative going along, but then in the second half of the cartoon, you would then go and see this hunter who is the villain of the cartoon, and he would try to go and hunt for the three bears. So it's up to Goldilocks to go and save the three bears. Now, if I can make a quick little review of it, yeah, honestly, I can definitely see where some of the craziness that people absolutely love, like, that's fully in there. Like, there's a lot of memorable quotes that are hilariously dumb as somebody touching my spaghetti. And the funny thing with the Papa Bear, like, since he is known to be, like, this angry father figure, like, kind of his trademark thing, I suppose, like, he does this several times, is, like, whenever there's something that's not going his way, he would just go ahead and slap his forehead and just go, you know, try to do something like that. Oh, wow, I actually did it well. Honestly, I tried practicing that, and I didn't really hit my mark, but finally, I actually did it, and I got it on tape, too. No, but, yeah, there are a lot of crazy, memorable moments that if you love Somebody Touching My Spaghetti, you go and watch the full cartoon, and I'm sure you'll come out with 5 things, at least, that you would feel that are equally as meme-worthy as Somebody Touching My Spaghetti. Like, there's this one that I find to be highly underrated, and it's actually from the Mama Bear, where she would be arguing with the Papa Bear on how he is treating his son, and there, like, the way that she would end it off, she would be holding his mouth and just go, "Shut to your face!" Honestly, I find that hilarious, and I don't know why that's not a meme, where people would actually be using that as a way to just close off an argument. If you had enough with someone else's crap, like if you're a YouTuber like me and you see somebody who's being angry and saying stupid crap in the comments section, all you just want to do is just grab their mouth and go, "Shut to your face!" and just go from there. Like, honestly, there's a lot of pretty memorable moments, but I will say, overall, though, this is a pretty mediocre cartoon, to be very honest, because the only parts that are actually really worth watching is actually just the first 4 minutes. And then once the hunter comes in, it just becomes your typical satire cartoon that's just trying to make a parody off of a fairy tale. You know, this is something that you know that a few years later, Tex Avery would come in and he would master that craft. Plus the fact that the quality of the animation, it's honestly not that great. You could tell that the budget is not really there, or maybe they don't have animators that are really as talented as the ones that would work on Looney Tunes or Disney or stuff like that. So overall, this is a pretty mediocre cartoon, but yeah, the first 4 minutes, I would say, definitely worth it. Please go check that out. But again, you might be wondering, so if that's the case, who's the one that actually made the Three Bears? Who actually made Somebody Touching My Spaghetti? Well, that is actually, interestingly enough, from a company called Toons. And this is actually the go-to cartoon studio from 20th Century Fox. And honestly, it's actually pretty interesting regarding Toons, because when you look back onto all the different cartoons that they had in the golden age of cartoons, like back in the 30s and 40s, of course there are a lot of memorable ones, and just like how we're doing this year, or like how we're doing it nowadays, they actually do sort it out by the companies that they come from. Of course, the masters of them all are Warner Brothers with the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, and then of course you also got Disney, where they got Mickey Mouse and the Silly Symphonies, and then you also got other studios that put in their contribution as well, including Universal with the Walter Lantz cartoons with Woody Woodpecker, Chilly Willy, and Andy Panda, and then of course you got Paramount, where they got Max Fleischer, and that's when they would go and work with, I'm trying to think, Yeah, like they would have cartoons like Betty Boop, Superman, and Popeye. But Terry Toons, however, honestly, they don't really have the quality written-wise and animation-wise as like some of the ones that I have mentioned. And they don't really have much memorable characters. Like, they have some of their own signature characters, like Heckle and Jekyll, Mighty Mouse, Gandy Goose. I think they also got Farmer Alfalfa. And yeah, that's pretty much it, honestly. But there is one thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. They actually did have Farmer Alfalfa. But one interesting thing that is actually worth noting is that with Terry Toons, they actually did have the start of many, or not many, but some legendary animators, and these would actually include Art Babbitt, who would be there in the very beginnings of Terry Toons, but then would later work at Disney. And then, of course, there is also Ralph Bakshi, who actually had his start in Terry Toons, working into projects just like Mighty Mouse. So that's pretty much who they are. And as for what would happen to them, well, funny enough, they would later go on to be purchased by CBS. So it's actually CBS who does own all the Terry Toons cartoons. So despite them being distributed by 20th Century Fox, no, it's not actually Disney that owns them. I know not too long ago there was that big Disney Fox deal, but Fox does not own the Terry Toons cartoons nowadays. It's actually CBS. So what all that pretty much means is that no, people, Disney does not own Somebody Touchin' My Spaghetti. They may have owned Steamed Hams, but they don't own the spaghetti, is pretty much all that I'm saying. And as with this cartoon with the three bears, that's more of a one-off thing. They don't have other cartoons that would actually feature these bears. It's just this one cartoon alone. And I guess almost 80 years later, it would actually find its fame on the internet just because of that one crazy line. But actually, that does beg the question. How is it that it ended up being so popular? I mean, out of all the things that are going on, like, how is it that this cartoon just suddenly burst out and now it's becoming an internet sensation? Well, using my source here on Know Your Meme, apparently what is that it was on Christmas 2017 when a Twitter user, Finaspertia, decided to tweet out the little clip of Somebody Touchin' My Spaghetti. And ever since then, like, it got so much attention, and the more people discovered it, the more insanity that they found. And ever since then, people decided to go ahead and take this little clip, and they would go and try to do little remixes. And one of the first ones that actually did come out of it is a little parody of All Star, where they just decided to go and do the little opening from Shrek, and then you would have one of the you would have like the Papa Bear just actually singing that part, but saying his famous line where you would actually hear, "Somebody touch my spaghetti." And that one, I do believe they actually have a credit, and that one was actually done by someone by the name of Stephany Folsom. And that was actually just a day after the discovery of Somebody Touchin' My Spaghetti. And from there, it really did caught on, and it just became its own meme, and it just became this giant subject of how it pretty much became its own thing. Like, now, it's now the hip and cool thing to take Somebody Touchin' My Spaghetti and just make your own crazy interpretation with it. I've seen numerous of combinations with this thing, and there's one that I feel like was actually a really good job. Someone actually took Somebody Touchin' My Spaghetti and took other parts of the cartoon, and they decided to do a little remix of one of the songs from Super Mario 3D World, where like you have the characters singing. It's like, somebody touch my spaghetti, touch my spaghetti, don't push it, and my cherry's broken too. Like, that was actually a lot of fun. But yeah, overall, how this became a meme, well, honestly, it's often pretty difficult to describe how something actually became popular, but I guess the whole thing with somebody touching my spaghetti, it just came from the ridiculousness of how stereotypically Italian that they decide to depict the father figure. And just like, if you think about it, that's probably one of the most stereotypical Italian things that you could ever say. Somebody touch my spaghetti. Like, you just see that sign of anger, and yeah, like, it would have to be this major like a stereotypical Italian that would be so mad about somebody touching their spaghetti. And honestly, it's kind of crazy, but then again, like, it is mostly harmless in a sense. It's not like it wouldn't be interpreted in a way that would seem like massively offensive in the veins of like Ugandan Knuckles. And it's not like going out of its way to make it like annoying, or it's not affecting people's lives in a way where like somebody touching my spaghetti has gone to the point of complete insanity on the internet. But yeah, I guess it was just this one crazy thing that happened and it completely blew up, you know? It's just like the whole B-movie meme where pretty much people decided to go completely crazy over this one random DreamWorks animation movie. And I guess now this little Terry Toons cartoon decided to get the spotlight. And honestly, at this point, it really did officially become the most popular Terry Toons cartoon, maybe more so than anything that would feature like Heckle and Jekyll or Mighty Mouse. And it's kind of funny in a way, but yeah, I guess these things happen. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying somebody touching my spaghetti. So I honestly don't know what else to say, but yeah, this is a pretty crazy thing that's been going on. I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know if this is really going to be a massive trend that will last for a long time in 2018, but I guess we will remember this cartoon for a long time. And with all that said, that is all that I've got for this week for the Animation Podcast, so thank you guys so much for listening, and you could go ahead and find more of my work at film-book.com. All you have to do is search for Mathieu Brunet or the Animation Podcast. You could go ahead and find me on Twitter also at AniMat505. Now, if you have listened to this podcast on iTunes or any other podcast service, do you mind doing us a little bit of a favor and you would go and rate and review this episode? That would actually be very nice of you. And if you are listening to this podcast on YouTube, then hit that like button and leave us a comment on your thoughts about the news this week. Tune in next week for the next episode of the Animation Podcast and all things animation. Thank you guys so much for listening. And until the next time, arrivederci, dudes.